What the fuck is going on, Canada?
Jesus, Baring, don't get your tits in a twist.
What the fuck?
G'day, tits. No, I wasn't talking about you. I was talking about his tits.
Now I think a decent mauling is in order. Prepare for a serving from bongo tits.
Oh, bugger it. Jesus, Baring, don't get your fucking panties in a bunch. You don't have to worry about Canada. It's doing fine. And we Canadians are on top of things.
This morning I saw a new video by Woolly Bumblebee pop up in my feed. It was about a proposed new bylaw in Canada's Saskatoon province, which directly threatens people's fundamental right to free speech.
I love the Woolly Bumblebee. Her videos can be highly entertaining. However, she can go off into the deep end at times and should do a bit more fact-checking before posting. And this was a case in point. As she checked into it deeper, she would have realized that the so-called threat to Canadian free speech was in fact just a proposed bylaw, which, if enacted, would have only affected those within the city limits of the city of Saskatoon, and no one else outside the city in the province of Saskatchewan or in the nation of Canada. She would also have noticed that the bylaw had been shot down and sent back to committee for review and rewording by the City Council on March 21st due to public backlash.
I was planning to cover another topic today, but I can't ignore this. This is a ridiculous, oppressive and insanely authoritarian proposal that citizens of the province should be rejecting at all costs.
Which is what the citizens of Saskatoon did, and which is why it was sent back to committee. It was thought to be too broad and too wide-sweeping in scope.
Now, as you'd expect with a proposal like this, it's been couched as something that will make society safer and fairer for citizens. In this case, it's being peddled as an anti-bullying bylaw.
Unfortunately, in the past 20 years, Canada has had a very sad record when it comes to dealing with bullying and its consequences. I'll go into detail about all this later on, but various levels of government, from federal down to municipal, have been trying to find ways to deal with the issue. Some successful, and others not so successful, such as this proposed bylaw.
I found an interview with Brian Traynor, an ex-police sergeant and advocate for the proposed new bylaw on theloop.ca. Let's have a look at it.
A proposed bylaw in Saskatchewan is hoping to put an end to bullying once and for all. People aged 12 and up could face fines anywhere from $300 to $2,500 for offenses like gossiping, name-calling, and mocking. Under the proposed bylaw, these acts, if committed in a public place like schools, parks, or streets, would be considered illegal. The proposed bylaw would also include private places such as bars and restaurants. Aiding or encouraging bullying would also be prohibited. Joining us now from Saskatoon is Brian Traynor. He's a retired police sergeant who delivers anti-bullying presentations in schools right across the province.
That was a good overview of the bylaw, and also why it was rejected by both the citizens of Saskatoon and its city council. It was too broad, it was too wide-sweeping, and it covered things it should not have covered.
How would this proposed law actually work? Walk us through it.
Well, there's been a big hullabaloo about this bylaw, and people are all in a flap about in a bar, in a restaurant. You mean you're going to come into Tim Hortons? The cops are going to hear me talking, and they're going to arrest me and charge me?
Well, that's exactly what you're proposing to give them the power to do, isn't it? But why would anyone think that they'd use that power once they have it? That's just fucking paranoia, isn't it, Brian?
No, it's not going to happen. That's not the intent of the bylaw.
From the German population's perspective, the intent of Adolf Hitler's 1933 Enabling Act wasn't to allow him to become a monstrous dictator responsible for the deaths of millions of people and the destruction of Europe.
Sorry, man, you just could not resist.
Intent means fuck all, Brian. It's the actual fine print words that count.
The intent of a new proposed law does matter. However, when the wording of that new law does not match the intent, the law is flawed. And in the case of this proposed bylaw, the wording was found to be flawed, the law flawed, and was rejected by both City Council and the citizens of Saskatoon.
The bylaw is intended for bullying in schools, but the city solicitors, made an attempt to try and identify three main types of bullying: verbal, physical, and psychological. And what they did was they listed various types of bullying activity, and unfortunately it's taken on a life of its own.
Mate, you didn't explain anything then. You started out by saying the law was intended to tackle schoolyard bullying, which is still fucking stupid.
I think this is a good place to discuss bullying in Canada and why various levels of government, from federal down to municipal, along with organizations such as police departments, schools, school boards, churches, and other NGOs are trying to come to grips with the issue. Now, when I speak of bullying and harassment, I am not talking about the bullshit complaints from fuckwads like Anita Sarkeesian, who cried to the UN, nor am I speaking about the kid who was butthurt because somebody called him a fag in passing. No, I'm speaking about the type of bullying that can lead to real and tragic consequences. In Canada, as I have mentioned earlier, we have had a sad and tragic history when it comes to bullying and its consequences. When I was growing up, there were two types of bullies. The first was the lone bully. Usually a kid who was a bit stronger, but lacked a sense of self-worth, and could only validate himself by picking on those he perceived to be weaker. The way to deal with these bullies was either to stand up to them, or wait until they got bored with you and went after a new target. The other class of bullies was a swarm or gang, a group of kids who banded together and picked on another kid for one reason or another. Individually, you could usually kick the living shit out of any one of these pricks. But if and when they swarmed you, the best you could do was curl up in a ball. Later, you could hunt them down individually and get some one-on-one payback. But bullying back then, while horrific and demeaning, it wasn't constant. Indeed, you could go for days or even weeks without interacting with your bully. And even when an incident did happen, once it was over, it was over. It rarely followed you home or happened outside the environment that you and your bully coexisted. Bullying today, however, has evolved to where it is constant, ongoing, unrelenting, and follows you everywhere. And this is what the solicitors in the city of Saskatchewan were attempting to identify and come to grips with. Today, bullying goes beyond mere physical abuse and name-calling. Today, it's often organized, coordinated, and targeted. This is in no small part due to how interconnected today's kids are through multimedia, social networks, and various devices such as computers and smartphones. Physical bullying still exists, only now it is often supplemented with an ongoing campaign of harassment and intimidation, often orchestrated and coordinated by one or a group of bullies via social networks, such as Facebook, Twitter, and text messaging. This campaign often draws in others who have no real connection to either the victim or the bully, but participate in the campaign because it seems like a game and is good for a laugh. A large part of the problem here in Canada, along with the rest of the Western world, is that we have raised a generation of self-centered, self-important, self-entitled, self-righteous little shits who have been taught from day one that they are special, that the world revolves around them, and that the sun shines out their ass. They've been raised to have no sense of responsibility for the consequences of their actions. As far as they are concerned, if someone suffers harm because of them, it's not their fault. Plus, they know that being underage minors, that if they are charged and convicted with bullying or causing harm to others, the most they most likely will get is probation and maybe some community service. While it is fashionable to blame the bleeding-hearted Liberals for this sad state of affairs, and, to be honest, they do share some responsibility, most of the blame, in my opinion, goes to the parents of these little shits. They are the ones that created them and raised them. These parents also tend to be blind to what little monsters they have created. As soon as one of their little darlings gets into trouble, their parents will attempt to shift the blame onto others, declaring that their little darlings would never do such a thing, and anybody who claims that they did is a lying piece of shit. Now, back in the late 60s and early 70s, if you complained to the police or the school authorities about being bullied, they would say there was something they can do about it, and that you should be a man and stand up to the one bullying you. And this was the attitude of the various authorities in Canada until very recently. Part of the problem is nobody really knows how to approach the issue, let alone how to deal with it. The various authorities are trying to come to grips with the issue, but are struggling. If you want an insight as to why Canadians from all walks of life and all political leanings take the issue very seriously and are trying to find ways to bring it under control, then you might want to Google Rita Burke, Jamie Hubley, Amanda Todd, and Riata Parsons. All four were victims of bullying, and all four are now gone. 1 by murder, 3 by suicide. We know that it's highly unlikely we will ever eradicate bullying, but we can try to minimize the amount of bullying that goes on and the damage it causes.
Then explained that some solicitors wrote down a list of what can be considered bullying, after which it, quote, took on a life of its own. Do you think the public is this fucking stupid? That was such a piss-weak excuse for an explanation.
It is said that an elephant is nothing more than a mouse designed by a government committee, and that is what this bylaw turned out to be. An elephant-sized and shaped mouse. ex-sergeant trainer is correct, in that during the development of this bylaw, the committee tasked with creating it lost control and it gained a life of its own. Now, in the past, I have sat on a number of committees tasked to develop policies and procedures for the companies I work for, and I've seen firsthand how easy it is to lose control of the process. You start off with a clear objective or deliverable and start to build it. Then usually someone has what they think is a good idea and convinces the rest of the committee to work it in. That idea then generates another, and then another, and then another, until you have a finished product which you are proud of, but it's so full of bloat and so misses the mark of the original objective that when you present it to those who commission the work, they go, what the fuck? Then some cunt starts to tear your opus to shreds using reason and logic. In the end, it is sent back to the humbled and chastised committee to be reworked, and that is what happened with this proposed bylaw.
You know, Brian, as a retired police detective, I'm curious your thoughts on how you actually go about enforcing this kind of thing if it ends up being adopted.
Let me guess, citizens will be encouraged to report illegal activity to the secret police, who will then investigate? I mean, the alternative is to have a policeman assigned to monitor any and every conversation between citizens, which might be a bit costly at this point in time.
Well, almost all bylaws across any jurisdiction in this country are complainant-driven. They're not police-driven. They're somebody files a complaint.
To the secret police?
No, not to the secret police, but to the regular police or bylaw enforcement officers. And yes, I understand you're trying to be a wee bit sarcastic here, but you missed the mark. When I was younger, I was a member of the Canadian Military Police, which, unlike their UK, US, and I believe Aussie counterparts, are fully accredited to peace officers and officers of the court, with the same powers of investigation, arrest, and detention as the RCP and other civilian police forces in Canada. While on garrison duty, apart from traffic violations, the vast majority of the incidents I responded to were called-in complaints usually involving fights, assaults, thefts, drunkenness, and domestic disputes, my least favorite incident to deal with, and other civil and military crimes. Rarely did we ever stumble upon a crime or a violation while it was happening. This holds true for most civilian cops in Canada. The vast majority of the incidents they respond to are called in by the public at large. Had this bylaw been passed as written, I very much doubt the City of Saskatchewan Police Department would have placed a high priority on enforcing it or even investigating it. They would have only acted if a serious and verifiable complaint had been made, and even then it would have been a low priority call. I figure that the amount of time and effort the Saskatchewan Police would have invested in enforcing this proposed bylaw would have been equal to as much as the law enforcement in the state of Mississippi spends on enforcing their anti-adultery or premarital sex laws. That is to say, little or no effort at all. By the way, the penalty for violating the Mississippi law is a fine of $500 or 6 months in prison upon conviction.
And the way I look at it is bylaws are empowering. They empower the community to make the community better by involving the citizens to be proactive, not to rely on the police to do something. So they see an incident, and for instance, we have noise bylaw, we have spitting on the sidewalk bylaw.
Yeah, now you want a gossiping, name-calling and mocking bylaw. So if this gets through, you can forget about telling any kind of joke because that's mocking, confiding in anyone else about anything because that's gossiping, and making any kind of accusation against anyone because that's name-calling. Ultimately, this is a law against disagreeing with the status quo. It is fucking ridiculous.
You're correct, it is fucking ridiculous. And that is why it was shot down and sent back to committee by the City Council.
Well, I can guarantee you there are not cops running around downtown Saskatoon looking for people spitting on the sidewalk.
Yeah, but they could be if they wanted to be, couldn't they, Brian? And that's the fucking point here.
They could. However, it would be highly inefficient and a complete waste of money, manpower, and resources. Also, Canadian cops are generally fairly pragmatic, like most Canadians, and I doubt they'd be very much bothered to enforce such a bylaw, even if instructed to do so.
I mean, if somebody phones a complaint, you deal with it. So it's discretion on the part of the police.
Sometimes, Brian, as you know, bullying is very obvious. Other times it can be a little bit blurry, whether this is just unpleasant behavior, whether it is in fact bullying. How do you decide?
Well, that's the beauty of this kind of law, isn't it? It'll be vague enough that those who are deemed guilty are the ones that the authorities want to be guilty.
I must state again that because this bylaw was so poorly written, so vague, and so broad in scope, that the City Council shot it down and sent it back to committee to be reworked.
And it's also, you look at the situation, bullying has three components to it. It's repeated, it's intentional, and it's harmful. So what's the reaction of the target?
Is this cunt serious? Whether or not someone's broken a law should depend solely on the actions that they take, not the reaction of some fucking pansy getting his knickers in a knot about being called a fuckhead.
I think he missed his point entirely. He's not talking about the bullshit bullying claims made by cunts like Anita Sarkeesian, Brianna Wu, or any of the hosts of third-wave feminazis or their Mangina and SJW allies. Nor is he talking about some sniveling middle wanker who is butthurt because somebody once called him a pansy or whatever. He is talking about chronic bullying and laid out the three attributes that identify it. 1, it is repeated, that is to say, it is ongoing and unrelenting. 2, it is intentional, that is to say, the person being bullied has been singled out or targeted for abuse, be it physical, verbal, emotional, or some combination of these. 3, it is harmful, including physical harm, emotional harm, and mental harm, and in the most extreme cases, death, either by suicide or murder. Imagine getting up each day with the knowledge that there is a good chance that sometime today a person is going to beat you, steal from you, and make your life a living hell, either at school or at work or even at home, and that you are next to powerless to stop it, and that tomorrow will be the same the day after that. This is the type of bullying that this bylaw was meant to have addressed. There are various anti-bullying campaigns and initiatives in Canada that are attempting to come to grips with and deal with chronic bullying. Some of the initiatives, such as the Pink Shirt Days, brings attention to and promotes a conversation about the issue and have had some positive effects. Others, such as this proposed bylaw, fails from the get-go and is quickly shit-canned.
And the reaction will dictate whether or not it's a bullying incident. You could say the same thing to two different people, and the reaction will be different. You could say something, say to a young woman, nice hair, and she'll go, oh, thank you very much. But you say it to another person, you go, oh, nice hair. Well, obviously your intonation and your actions indicate that you're being snarky, you're being sarcastic, so she may take it as a bullying incident.
I cannot believe he just said that. So according to this lunatic, saying nice hair to a woman is fine, but saying nice hair in a slightly more snarky tone should be a crime which is reported to and investigated by the police. Fucking hell.
Okay, I'll give you that one. I have to admit that was an extremely stupid thing for him to have said.
I sincerely hope I reflect the attitude of the citizens of Saskatoon when I say, fuck right off, Brian, and stick this Orwellian law right up your ass.
Okay, 2 points in closing. First off, Brian Traynor is just a talking head brought in by the third-rate CTV news organization as some sort of authority on bullying, and as such, is just stating his opinion, much like you and I are doing here. Since he does not sit in City Council and has no vote there, he cannot do much to get this bylaw passed. And to be honest, while I'm sure he agrees with the intent of the bylaw, I don't get the feeling that he totally agrees in the way that it is written. Second, now let's imagine that this bylaw was not only passed as written, but was actually being enforced. What do you imagine would happen? First, it would have triggered protests in the streets. And secondly, it would have triggered a charter challenge right up to the Supreme Court of Canada. As the U.S. has its Bill of Rights in its Constitution, we in Canada have our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which, as its name says, guarantee Canadians their rights and freedoms. It also limits the types of laws all levels of Canadian government can pass and enforce on Canadians. Now, one of the main jobs of any government is to pass laws, and most have the power to pass any law they wish. However, to be legal and enforceable in Canada, all laws must not contradict nor be contrary to the Charter. If they do contradict and are contrary to the Charter, they must be struck down and made null and void. All Canadians have the right to start a Charter challenge if they feel a law goes against the spirit and the intent of the Charter. And it is the Supreme Court of Canada who ultimately makes the judgment as to whether or not a law is constitutionally sound in regards to the Charter. For this to work, you need a Supreme Court that is not only well-versed in the law and the Charter, but one that is also independent of government interference and apolitical. That is to say, the jurists sitting on the bench must be able to put aside their own personal political beliefs and ideology and base their judgment solely on the arguments presented to the courts. And this is what we have in Canada, a Supreme Court that is independent and apolitical. And this was aptly demonstrated and confirmed during the previous government's 10-year run. During that time, the Stephen Harper neoconservatives passed a number of laws which could only be called draconian and were actual attacks on and attempts at curtailing and limiting the rights and freedoms of all Canadians. And he did this in the name of security. These laws led to a number of charter challenges, and the court ruled against the Conservatives 8 straight times, rendering these laws null and void. This happened even though Harper attempted to create a more government-friendly court by appointing 7 conservative-leaning jurists to the bench. And even so, these jurists were able to put aside their political beliefs and make their judgments solely based on the merits of the arguments presented to them as to whether or not the laws were contrary and contradicted the spirit and the letter of the Charter. These 8 laws would have affected all Canadians who were found to be in conflict with the Charter and were struck down. Now, had this bylaw been passed, I do not doubt for a moment that it would have been subject to a Charter challenge and would have been struck down as unconstitutional. So in closing, you and others do not really have to worry about Canada and our freedom of speech. We have it covered, and trust me, we keep a very close eye on all levels of government, see what they're getting up to, and we'll deal with them as need be, just as Stephen Harper's neocons. We fired their fucking asses during the last general election. Since I didn't prepare a closing, I'll let Barry take us out.